They said the swing set had been abandoned for months. But every morning, just as the mist lifted from the grass, he was there, a German shepherd, motionless, staring at the rusted chains that no longer moved. This is not a story about rescue. It's a story about waiting for someone who couldn't speak, but somehow still knew what the dog needed to hear. Like, share, and tell us where in the world you are watching from today. The first time I saw him, it was early October, the kind of morning where the fog clung low to the ground and the grass wept with dew. The park was empty, hushed under a quilt of mist, save for one figure, a German shepherd sitting perfectly still at the edge of the swing set. Not sniffing, not pacing, not even watching the birds. Just sitting, waiting. I didn't approach right away. I had no reason to. I was just passing through, taking the long way home from a grave I visited more than I should. But something about him stopped me. His ears were forward. Not alert, exactly, but listening. The kind of listening that's not about sound, but about memory. He was thin, though not skeletal. Old but not feeble. His fur had that sun-faded look that hinted at once being well cared for once. But now, dirt clung to his haunches. There was dried blood crusted into one paw. A small patch of skin near his rib showed pink through the missing fur. But it wasn't the wounds that hurt to see. It was the way he faced the swing. Not me. Not the street. Just that empty swing. The chains creaked in the breeze. The seat swaying just enough to break your heart. A child had once laughed there, and you could feel it. Some memories lived in that place, strong enough to keep the dog anchored. He never barked, never whined. He simply waited, as if time had bent itself around his vigil. I came back the next morning. Same time, same mist, same dog. I brought a thermos of coffee and stood across the playground, unsure why my feet had brought me here again. I poured a cup and held it close. He didn't flinch, didn't look at me, didn't run, just sat there, eyes fixed on nothing and everything. On the third day, I bought an old blanket. I laid it down on the bench nearest the swing set and waited. Not for him, but with him. The silence between us was not empty. It was thick. It held the weight of something unspoken. I don't know how long I sat there before I realized I was crying. Not loudly. Just the kind of soft crying that seeps out when grief recognizes itself. The fourth morning, I brought food. Not a dog bowl that would have been presumptuous. I set a tin tray near the edge of the mulch and stepped away. He sniffed it finally, ate in silence, like someone remembering what it meant to accept kindness. When he finished, he licked the tray clean, then turned back to the swing set, as if nothing had changed. And maybe it hadn't. Not yet. But the next morning, I found paw prints in the dew that led not just to the swing, but to the bench where I'd sat. He hadn't stayed, but he'd looked. That was enough. I began to bring small things. A folded towel for him to lie on. A bowl of clean water. Sometimes a worn toy from a thrift store is always left untouched. But he let me be near. Close enough that I could see the gray around his muzzle. The notched scar near his ear. The old tag on his collar is illegible now from rust and time. No one came for him. I asked around, but no one claimed him. Animal control passed through once, but left him when I said I was watching him. I didn't lie. I was. I didn't own him. I didn't name him. But every morning, I was there. And so, was he? I started to talk to him. Not loud, just softly. About nothing. About the weather. About grief. About silence. I told him I understood. That sometimes a place is the last thing that makes sense. That sometimes, if you sit still enough, the past finds you. The swing creaked. The wind shifted. And the fifth morning, I found something I hadn't expected. A small shoe-faded red canvas. No laces. It was tucked behind the wooden beam of the play structure. Not buried, not forgotten. Just placed. Like an offering. I held it in my hand. And looked at the dog. His ears twitched. But he didn't look away from the swing. and I understood. Something had happened here, something more than I could guess. But the dog knew, and he was waiting, not for me, not for rescue, for someone else, someone smaller, someone silent. And that's when I started to bring my niece. She was barely a year old. I didn't speak much, just cooed and stared with those heavy-lashed eyes that saw too much. Her mother and my sister had been struggling, and I had offered to take her during the mornings. I didn't plan to bring her to the park, but something told me I had to. I set her down on a blanket a few feet away from the swing set. She didn't cry. She didn't crawl. She just stared at the dog, and for the first time he turned his head. It was only a glance, a brief turn of his head, barely more than a shift in shadow. But I saw it. I felt it. Like a thread tugging in the air between them. The baby made no sound. Her small hand had simply reached out, not toward him, but to the space between, as if offering silence in return for his purr. The shepherd didn't move. Again, he returned his gaze to the swing, but something had changed, the kind of change you don't measure in movement, but in the air, in the space between eyes and breath. I remember watching my niece Olivia as she slowly leaned forward on her hands. She wasn't crawling yet, not really, but she dragged herself in those small, tentative scoots that toddlers use when the floor still feels unfamiliar. Her fingers dug into the damp earth, and she crept 3 inches closer to the edge of the mulch where he sat. Not far, but far enough to notice. The dog didn't move, but I could see the subtle twitch of muscle beneath his coat, the slight flex of his shoulder, like someone deciding whether to flinch. He didn't, and so I sat, quiet as breath, letting the moment breathe without interruption. Olivia froze. Not out of fear. Babies don't know fear, the way we do. She froze the way a candle flickers when the wind stills. Watching, feeling, her eyes wide, her chest rising in the slow rhythm of unlearned trust. And then she did something I hadn't expected. She smiled. It wasn't a big, laughing smile. It was soft. The kind of smile that doesn't ask for anything, that simply exists. Her hand stayed out, palm open, fingers curled, waiting, and the German shepherd, disbattered, haunted sentinel, finally blinked. Once, long, deliberate. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the wind outside the window, and all I could think about was that blink. I've seen dogs blink 1,000 times, but this was different. This was an acknowledgement, not me, of her, as if, for the first time, he'd seen something not as memory, but as present, as possible. I brought Olivia again the next morning. I didn't plan it. It just felt necessary, like finishing a sentence you hadn't meant to start. She was quiet again, content to sit with her little hand wrapped around a toy giraffe. I set her down on the same blanket, a little closer this time. The shepherd was already there, of course. Same place, same position, same silence. But now, he watched us arrive. I saw his eyes shift as I unfolded the blanket. I watched him take the shape of a child. His ears twitched as Olivia made a small, almost inaudible sigh. And again, she reached, not toward the toy, not toward the food, toward him. The space between them was still wide, maybe 6 feet, but it felt smaller, like a hallway narrowing, with each breath. I didn't interfere, didn't push, just sat beside her, silent, my coffee warm in my hands. And then, as the minutes passed, I saw him do something new. He lowered his body, slowly, his front legs tucked, head resting on his paws, ears relaxed, not asleep, not at ease, but less guarded. A few kids came by later, 2 boys kicking a soccer ball. They passed through the edge of the park, noisy and half wild, the way kids are. Olivia didn't notice, but the dog did. He sat up, not to bark, not to confront, but to place himself between them and her, as if some old instinct had stirred, not to protect territory, but someone smaller, someone fragile. The boys left without incident, and when they were gone, he returned to his spot. But this time, instead of facing the swing, he faced her. Head tilted, ears are soft, watching. That was the first day he ate from my hand. Not directly, not with trust, but he took the piece of boiled chicken I offered, then lay back down without a sound. I didn't speak, didn't praise, just let it happen, like watching fog dissolve in morning light. Over the next week, something, like a pattern, began to form. I'd arrive early with Olivia bundled in her soft blue blanket, her giraffe clenched tightly. We'd lay out the same square of fabric, and I'd sit beside her while the shepherd took his place a few feet away, always before us, always waiting. But no longer for the swing alone. He began to anticipate her, I could tell. His eyes followed her movements, small as they were, her hands swaying gently at blades of grass, her coos when the wind moved her hair. The smallest hiccup would make his ears lift. The smallest laugh made his head tilt. She was becoming real to him. I didn't understand it yet, not fully. I still wondered who he had belonged to, and what child had once climbed that swing, whose laughter still haunted the chains. I hadn't found a poster. No missing pet report. No collar tag to trace. Just that single, small shoe, still resting near the beam. I hadn't moved it. Neither had he. There was something sacred about that space. Something I didn't want to disturb. Even Olivia never crawled to it. She'd stare but never touch. On the 8th day, it rained. Lightly, a gentle pattering on the leaves. I debated staying home. Olivia was warm and drowsy, and I almost let her nap through the morning. But something inside urged me to go. I wrapped her in an extra layer, and carried her in my arms through the drizzle. When we arrived, the shepherd wasn't there. My heart jumped, not in fear, but in disappointment. I felt hollow, foolish, like someone who'd shown up to a memory that had already faded. I laid the blanket down anyway, set Olivia gently upon it, waited, and after 5 minutes he came. Out of the trees, his fur, darker with rain, paws, muddy, but eyes still locked in that same quiet watchfulness. He walked slower than before, but instead of going to the swing, he came to us, closer than he ever had. He sat 2 feet away, and Olivia reached again, her tiny hand outstretched. This time, I didn't stop her. I watched, breath held, and the shepherd leaned forward. Not much, not even enough to touch, but close, close, enough that I could see his nostrils flare, that she could feel the warmth of his breath. Close enough that a connection, long buried and unspoken, trembled into being. The rain fell around us like a memory, and in that moment, wet, silent, and impossibly still, I knew something had shifted. Not fully, not forever, but just enough. He was no longer waiting for someone lost. He was beginning to see someone new. The next morning, there was frost on the grass, thin, glistening, like the ground had been painted with memory overnight. I bundled Olivia in her warmest coat and mittens, her nose barely peeking out from the folds. The park was still. Even the swings had frozen in place, crusted with dew that glinted under the gray sky. But I knew he'd be there, and he was. He stood this time, not seated as usual, as if he'd been waiting in motion. Pacing, maybe, or restless. His eyes found Olivia instantly, and when I lowered her gently to the blanket, he took a step closer, without waiting for permission. It wasn't a bold step, more like a cautious drift, as though his body had moved before his fear could stop it. He stopped just at the edge of the blanket, his paws pressing lightly into the frozen grass. Olivia's hand reached up again, glove on now, and though she made no sound, the gesture felt full of speech. The shepherd leaned forward and sniffed. One soft breath, then another. I didn't move. I barely even blinked. My heart was in my throat, not out of fear, but reverence. There's something holy about the first moment trust crosses a line it's never dated before. He touched her glove with his nose, gently, delicately, and then sat down, right there, close enough that his fur brushed the edge of her blanket. He didn't look at me, didn't seek approval. He simply stayed, as if he'd made his decision. I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Olivia giggled a light bubbling sound that startled me more than the dog, but he didn't flinch. In fact, something in his ears softened. He didn't smile. Of course, dogs don't smile. But his body relaxed in the way only peace can produce. I stayed longer that day. An hour, maybe 2. We shared the space, the silence, and the cold. I offered him more chicken from my palm, and he took it without hesitation. I poured water into a shallow plastic dish, and he drank without looking away from the child. And Olivia, in her wordless way, kept gifting him that same hand, that same soft stare, as if nothing else in the world existed. People walked past us now and then, a couple jogging, a man walking his own dog on the far side of the park. No one disturbed us. Perhaps the stillness we created had weight to it, or maybe people just knew when not to intrude. I started journaling, just small notes, scribbles in the margins of my grocery list, descriptions of his behavior, the day he stopped limping, the moment he sniffed Olivia's cheek, the first time he followed us to the car but stopped at the edge of the lot. I didn't know why I was writing it down, only that I didn't want to forget. There was no rush, no story unfolding quickly, just a slow breathing of time the way trees grow or fog lifts. He was there every morning, rain or frost, always in place before we arrived, and every day a little closer, a little more present, a little less ghost. I began calling him boy. It wasn't a name, not really, just a word, a sound he could attach to presence, to warmth. I'd say it once, quietly, "Hey, boy," and he'd turn his ears, not always his head, but enough for a start. Olivia would mimic me in her own way, babbling something soft, rhythmic, a baby's version of language. She'd point at him, grin, then bury her face in the folds of her coat. I think she liked the way he watched her, not with intensity, but with a kind of solemn patience, like he was waiting for her to grow into something only he understood. One morning, I noticed something different in his walk, a slight catch in his back leg. Not a limp exactly, but a stiffness that hadn't been there before. I watched as he lowered himself more slowly, and when he shifted, he winced barely, but I caught it. I moved closer, kneeling beside him as Olivia sat watching with wide eyes. "You okay, boy?" I whispered. He looked at me for the first time that day, direct, measured. I reached out, slowly, hand hovering above his spine. He didn't pull away. I brushed my fingers gently down his back, past the shoulder blade, to the hip. He flinched when I touched a patch near the joint. No sound, just the muscle tensing under my fingers. A scar there, old, but angry. I pulled back and whispered, "Okay, that's enough." I started bringing pain reliever paste the next day. The kind safe for dogs, something I'd used on my old collie years ago. He let me apply for it, eventually. Not the first time, not the second, but by the third morning, he stayed still as I rubbed it gently into his haunch, his breathing even, his eyes half lidded with memory. He was healing, bit by bit. Not just in the body. On the way he let me sit beside him, the way he let Olivia tug softly at the fur near his paw, the way he'd rise when we left, as if escorting us, though he never crossed the parking lot. And then one day, something changed. I arrived late, only by 15 minutes, but late enough that I expected to find him already there, waiting. But he wasn't. The swing was still. The grass was empty. The spot beside the blanket, undisturbed. My heart raced. I walked around the playground, checked the trees, the shelter, the edge of the lot. Nothing. The park had never felt so silent. Olivia cooed softly in my arms, sensing something. I stood still, wind pushing at my jacket, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing, if grief had made the dog up, built him from guilt and longing. And then I heard a rustle from behind the play structure. Not loud, not hurried, just enough. I turned, and there he was, emerging from behind the low wall of the slide, limping slightly, carrying something in his mouth, a scrap of fabric. He padded slowly to where Olivia now sat on her blanket and dropped the fabric at her side. I recognized it instantly. It was the old towel I had once left near the swing. Weeks ago, I hadn't seen it since. He'd carried it, keep it, and now I returned it. Olivia reached out, as always, and touched it, then touched his paw, and this time he didn't pull away. He lay down beside her, chest against the grass, eyes closed, and I sat in silence. Not as a rescuer, not as a witness, but as someone who, for the first time in years, didn't feel alone. The towel was frayed at the edges, the fabric stiff with old dirt and dried leaves. But Olivia held it like something sacred, like it had been meant for her all along. Her tiny fingers worked the corner of it between her hands as the shepherd rested his head beside her, unmoving eyes half-lidded with something close to peace. I didn't speak, just watched. The park seemed to fall into a hush that even the wind respected. No swings creaked. No crows called. The sky was low and pale, as if the morning were holding its breath. That image of Olivia with one hand resting on the dog's thick fur and the other grasping a piece of forgotten fabric stayed with me all day. I found myself staring at it in my mind as I drove, as I made tea, even as I folded laundry. It was more than a gesture. It was a tether. Something was being remembered, not by me, but by him. Something that ran deeper than names or places. Something buried in scent, touch, time. That evening, I returned to my small bookshelf, the one tucked in the corner of the living room beneath the window. I pulled out an old binder, thick with clear sleeves and faded printouts, records from the shelter where I used to volunteer. Not recent, 5, maybe 6 years old. I hadn't opened it since I stopped going. Since before Olivia was born. Since before my sister began unraveling. I flipped through pages slowly, not expecting much, but a name came to mind. Charlie. It was vague, but my memory latched onto it. There had been a dog, then a shepherd mix, surrendered by a family after their house burned down. The story had been quiet. No cruelty, just devastation. A child in the family. A little girl. I hadn't been part of the intake, only the feeding chart, but I remembered the eyes, haunted, watchful, waiting. I turned the pages faster, and then I found it. The intake photo was grainy black and white, but it was him, younger, no gray on the muzzle, but the same notched scar above the eye, the same slope in the right shoulder. Listed under a temporary name, Shadow. I whispered the name aloud, testing it against the air. But it felt like a closed door now. Something he'd outgrown. I read further. Surrendered after house fire. No fatalities. Family unable to keep. Child traumatized. The dog exhibited signs of separation anxiety. I remembered now. They had moved out of state. Left no forwarding address. The dog had been adopted briefly. Returned after 2 weeks. Too quiet. Doesn't play. Doesn't respond. Eventually he'd slipped through the cracks. Sent to a partner shelter. And from there the trail went cold. Until now. Until a silent park and a child who didn't speak. The next morning, I said his name out loud to the one from the file. Shadow, I whispered, as I laid the blanket down. He didn't react. Not even a blink. But Olivia looked up, as if she felt the weight of the word. The connection between them had grown stronger in ways I couldn't explain. She was crawling now, real crawling, not the awkward scoot of a few weeks ago. And she crawled only one direction, toward him. He didn't shy away. If anything, he adjusted his position slightly to allow her near. She liked to nestle her head against his side. Sometimes she'd fall asleep there, her hand still clutched around that ragged towel. I kept coming, day after day, and the shadow, boy, or whatever he was now kept meeting us. But the swing set had begun to fade from his attention. Where once he sat with unwavering focus on the rusted chain, now he looked toward Olivia. The past still clung to him, yes, in the scars, in the way he flinched at sharp sounds, but it no longer ruled him. Something new had taken root. One afternoon, a woman from the neighborhood stopped as I was packing up. She leaned on the fence and said, "That is your dog." I hesitated, then said, "Not exactly." She smiled. "He's been here for months, never let anyone near him, but he looks different now, softer maybe." I didn't answer. I didn't know how. She paused, watching him lick Olivia's mitten. "Funny thing," she said. "There was a little girl who used to play here, a couple years back, lived 2 streets over. Her name was Molly, I think. They moved away suddenly. After a fire, I think." Her voice lowered. "The kid never came back to say goodbye to her dog. People said she cried for weeks. The woman left soon after, but her words clung to me. Molly. I had no way to confirm it, but I didn't need to. I could see the ghost of her in the way the shepherd sometimes still stared at the swing, like a muscle memory of grief, and maybe Olivia, in her wordless way, reminded him of that lost child, not as a replacement, but as a new beginning, a tether to the present. That week, I brought a soft new collar. I didn't try to put it on. I just set it down beside the blanket. Shadow sniffed it once, then nudged it closer with his nose. Not acceptance, but consideration. Olivia reached for it next. She held it up loose and lopsided in her tiny hands and pressed it gently against his neck. He didn't pull away, didn't even flinch. It was raining again the day I tried it for real. Soft drizzle, barely more than a whisper. I brought warm broth in a thermos and a fresh blanket for Olivia. The old towel had begun to tear, and she no longer clutched it with the same urgency. She had him now. That was enough. I waited until he lay down beside her, eyes heavy, breath slow. Then I knelt beside him. "It's just a collar," I said. "No cage, no leash, just a way to say you belong." I moved slowly, threading it behind his ears. His body tensed for one breath, to then settled. I buckled it with quiet hands. He turned his head and looked at me. Not with fear, not with grief, with something older, something steadier, trust. Olivia clapped once. It was the first sound she had made all morning. Not a word, but a celebration. We left the park slowly that day. I carried her in one arm, the empty thermos in the other. Shadow followed, not beside me, behind. Close, but not dependent. Still his own, still watching. But he didn't stop at the edge of the parking lot this time. He crossed it. He followed us to the car and waited. I opened the back door, laid a towel across the seat, and said, "Only if you want to." I didn't call him, didn't pat the seat. Just wait. He stood still for a moment, the rain dripping from his muzzle. Then he stepped forward, one paw, then the next. Slowly, carefully, like memory itself was climbing beside us. The sound of his paws settling on the towel-covered seat was softer than I expected. No scraping of nails, no anxious shuffle, just wait, quiet, deliberate wait. I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there for a long moment, hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, Olivia gurgling in her car seat beside me, and the shepherd lying so still I could barely tell if he was breathing. The car smelled faintly of wet fur and baby powder. The windows fogged at the corners from our breath. It felt like we were suspended in something for a moment that didn't quite know if it was ending or beginning. I reached back once, cautiously, and touched his shoulder through the towel. He didn't flinch, just turned his head slightly, eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. Not a look of dependence, not fear, just presence. I drove slowly. We didn't go far. I lived in a small house, one of those narrow ones tucked behind trees, like it was trying not to be seen. I parked in the gravel, unbuckled Olivia, and carried her in, then came back for him. I opened the door and stepped aside. "It's open," I said quietly. "Only if you want." He hesitated, sniffed the air, then jumped down, paws soft against the gravel, tail low but not tucked. He followed me up the steps without being called. I opened the door. He crossed the threshold. Just like that. No hesitation. No permission needed. He walked into my house like he had already seen it before, like he'd dreamt it, maybe, and found it just as he remembered. I laid Olivia in her crib, and for the first time since the swing set, I saw the shepherd walk without watching her. He paced the hallway, slow and silent, pausing at each doorway like he was mapping something old. He stopped at the linen closet, sniffed once, then moved on. He circled the living room, inspected the hearth, stood beneath the window, as though checking for something. Finally, he settled near the back door, body curled tight, eyes open. He didn't sleep. Not yet, but he stayed. That night, I left the door cracked, just a few inches, enough that he could leave if he needed, but he didn't. He remained there, unmoving, as if guarding something, or perhaps waiting to be sure the dream wouldn't vanish by morning. Olivia woke once, a soft cry that stirred the dark, and before I could rise, I heard the sound of paws on hardwood. He was already in her room, not inside the crib, not on the bed, just beside it, sitting, watching. And when she settled, so did he. That morning the house was quieter than usual. Not the silence of emptiness, but a full silence, like the kind that follows prayer or music. I found him near the kitchen, eyes half-lidded, breathing steady. I poured my coffee, opened the door, and he rose, not urgently, but with readiness. He still wanted the park, still wanted the place he had guarded for so long. So we went. When we arrived, he walked ahead, straight to the swing. He stood there a long time. The wind moved the chains. Olivia watched from my hip, one hand resting over my heart, her small body calm against mine. He circled the swing once, twice, then lay down beside it, nose close to the leg of the frame. I set Olivia down on the blanket a few feet away. She didn't crawl to him this time. She sat and waited, as if she knew it was his moment, not hers. Eventually, he rose. I walked to her side and lay down again. And just like that, the swing no longer held him. He had let it go. Over the next few days, we established a rhythm. Morning park visits, quiet afternoons, gentle routines. I washed him, finally, not a full bath, not yet, but a careful rinse with warm clothes. He stood still through it all, patient as stone. When I brushed out his coat, I found bits of mulch, splinters, and a rusted washer tangled near his collar. I saved it. I didn't know why, I just couldn't throw it away. The towel he'd returned to Olivia stayed in the crib now. She'd fall asleep with her hand gripping the corner, and the shepherd, I still hadn't named him, would sleep in the hallway outside her door, night after night, without fail. One evening, I watched him as the sun fell across the floor in golden stripes. He was staring out the window, posture straight, eyes alert. I walked over and crouched beside him. "You're not looking for her anymore, are you?" I whispered. He didn't move, but I felt the answer settle in the quiet between us. I reached out and touched his chest, felt the heartbeat there, steady, present, and I realized, for the first time in a long while, mine matched it. A letter arrived a few days later, from my sister, handwritten, apologetic, scattered in its grammar, but earnest. She asked if Olivia was still too young to understand, Maybe she could visit sometime soon. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it away. Not as rejection, not as finality, just not yet. I wasn't ready. Olivia wasn't ready. And somehow I think the dog wasn't either. The next morning, we didn't go to the park. Not out of avoidance, just instinct. We stayed in the backyard. Olivia sat on the porch step, babbling softly to her giraffe. The shepherd lay beside her, head resting on her foot. It was quiet, the kind of quiet you don't want to disturb. That afternoon, I watched from the kitchen window as Olivia dropped her toy. It rolled down the steps. She reached for it, tottering on unsteady legs. The shepherd stood instantly, not barking, not panicked, just poised, watching. She slipped, not far, just enough to scare herself. A small fall, a tiny cry. Before I could move, he was there, pressing his body beside her, blocking the edge of the step. She clung to his fur, stopped crying, just held on, and he stayed there, strong and still. Like a bridge she could crawl across, if she needed to. That night, I laid down in bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I thought about guardians, about grief, about what it means to be chosen, not just once, but again. Not out of an accident, but out of recognition. He hadn't been waiting for rescue. He had been waiting to matter again, and somehow in a town that had moved on, in a park that had grown silent, in a house that had once been full of echo, he had found his place. With her, with us, it started with the mail carrier. She was the first to say anything. Her name was Nora, mid-60s, slow-moving, always wore a floral scarf, no matter the weather. She'd been delivering mail to our street for over a decade, long enough to know which houses were empty, which porches creaked, which dogs barked behind fences. She knew our rhythms. One morning, she paused at the gate and looked toward the porch. Olivia was on her knees, rocking gently beside the shepherd, one hand pressed to his fur, the other gripping her stuffed giraffe like a compass. He sat motionless, ears relaxed, eyes soft, tail curled around her like a question mark. Nora tilted her head. "That your dog now?" she asked. I hesitated. "Sort of," I said. "He chose us." She nodded once, like that made perfect sense. "He's got that look," she said, "like he's done waiting." She handed me the stack of letters. Some dogs are born twice. The second time, when they're needed. I held on to that sentence longer than I meant to. The second time when they're needed. After that, small comments started to collect like fallen leaves. The elderly man across the street waved more often, his eyes lingering on the shepherd as we passed. A woman at the grocery store, whose daughter went to the same daycare Olivia would soon attend, mentioned seeing that beautiful dog during our walks. "He doesn't pull or bark," she said. "Just moves like he's walking through memory." It wasn't just the people. It was the way things started fitting again. The way the back door didn't creak when I opened it with him beside me. The way to the empty corner of the living room, the one I never decorated, suddenly looked right with his bed tucked into it. The way Olivia laughed more, louder, freer. The way she reached for him before she reached for anyone else, including me. Some mornings I'd wake and find them curled together at the base of her crib, her foot resting gently on his back, her cheek against his side. I'd stand in the doorway and let it imprint, not take a photo, not make a sound, just watch. Some moments are too sacred to trap. I began sleeping more soundly, not just because Olivia was more settled, but because the house no longer echoed. It breathed again, lived again. Even the old wooden floorboards seemed to creak more kindly underfoot. One afternoon, we visited the park again. I wasn't sure if he'd want to return if the swing set still whispered ghosts to him, but when we arrived, he walked ahead as though reclaiming something. He sniffed the air, circled the swing once, then lay beneath it, not like a sentry, but like someone coming home on his own terms. Olivia toddled through the grass, holding tight to her giraffe, falling and standing again. her little legs carrying her like wind-blown leaves. When she reached him, she didn't sit. She stood, wobbly but certain, and pressed her hand gently to his shoulder. He turned, licked her mitten, then returned his gaze to the trees. A woman nearby sitting on a bench with a stroller called over gently. "They look like they've known each other forever." "Maybe they have," I said, surprising even myself. She smiled. "We used to see that dog here, months ago. Wouldn't let anyone near him. My son threw him a sandwich once. He growled, not angry. Just sad. He doesn't growl anymore," I said. "But I know what you mean." That night, Olivia took her first real step. Not a stumble, not a half fall, a step toward him. He was lying just a few feet from her on the rug, and she rose from her knees, unsteady but determined, and stepped. One foot, then the other. Then she collapsed against him, giggling in that breathless way babies do when even gravity becomes a game. He didn't move, just looked at me, and I understood. He hadn't just helped her walk, she had helped him stay. I found myself talking to him more, in the kitchen, while preparing Olivia's bottle, in the hallway, after long days. Whispered fragments of my life, things I hadn't said aloud in years, about the divorce, the miscarriage before Olivia, the nights I sat by her crib, wondering if love could ever be enough, the quiet ways my sister unraveled, the guilt of not stopping it sooner. I told him everything, not because I expected him to understand, but because he never walked away. Some days, I swore he listened, not with ears, but with stillness, a silence that invited truth. One evening Olivia pressed her forehead to his and closed her eyes. Not for a second, for a full minute. He didn't blink, didn't shift, just let it happen. It was more than affection, it was reverence. Two souls meeting in the space between heartbeat and breath. That same week, I noticed something unexpected. He'd begun sleeping beside the crib less, and beside my door more. Not instead of, just as well. As if he understood we were all part of the same quiet promise now. I started keeping his water bowl in the kitchen, moved his bed to the base of the stairs. Small things, but meaningful. I bought him a tag, plain, no name, just a single word etched on it, found. On the back, I engraved my address. Below that, Olivia's name, not mine, hers, as if he belonged to her more than anyone. Because he did. The weather began to change. Mornings came later, wrapped in fog. Leaves scattered the porch in rusted oranges and brittle yellows. One morning, Olivia pointed to a tree and said something close to woof. I didn't correct her, didn't say it wasn't a dog, because maybe to her, everything steady, everything rooted, was just another version of him. That day, he followed us farther than usual, past the bakery. Down a street we hadn't walked together before. I turned around once, uncertain, but he kept going, only stopping when we reached a small white house with green shutters. I didn't recognize it, but he did. He sniffed the base of the mailbox, sat down at the gate, stared at the porch. I looked down and noticed a worn toy faded red, no laces, a second shoe, just like the one I'd found tucked behind the beam at the swing set. I felt a chill crawl down my arms, not fear, recognition. I didn't open the gate, I didn't knock, but I took Olivia's hand and stood beside him, and for a long moment, we were all quiet, staring, waiting, not for a person, but for memory itself, to say goodbye. We didn't stay long at the green-shuttered house. 10 minutes, maybe less. Enough. Time to feel the weight of something pass through us. Shadow, yes. I'd started calling him that again, didn't scratch at the door, didn't whine or pace. He simply sat, watching. The way he used to sit at the swing set, not as a dog abandoned, but as one bearing witness. I looked down at Olivia, who was holding tightly to 2 fingers of my right hand. She was quiet, almost too quiet. Her eyes fixed on the window, where a pale curtain fluttered once before, stilling again. I never saw anyone look out, but I sensed that someone was behind the glass, just out of view. Maybe watching him, or maybe remembering. When Shadow stood again, it wasn't rushed. He turned slowly, gave one last glance at the porch, then padded back toward the sidewalk. I followed him without a word, and Olivia, steady on her small feet, didn't even stumble. We never went back to that house. Not because we weren't welcome, but because the moment had already done its work. It had released something. And from that point on, Shadow never looked over his shoulder when we walked home. He had stopped looking backward. That evening, something shifted in the house. I noticed it in the air, the way it felt fuller. Like whatever space he had occupied before, he now inhabited entirely. No longer a guest, no longer a shadow in the corner, just ours. Olivia slept through the night, not a stir, not a sound, and when I rose in the morning, I found her still curled against his side, at the base of the crib. Her hand was resting on his flank. His head was against her feet. They looked carved from the same breath. I stood in the doorway for a long time before I turned away. Not because I was afraid of waking them, but because I wanted to carry that stillness with me a little longer, into the kitchen, into the day. A few days later, I noticed Olivia had stopped carrying the giraffe. She still held it now and then, but never for long. Her fingers had found a new anchor, the long fold of Shadow's ear, the ruffle of fur at his neck, the firm softness of his back. He never flinched, never shifted. He seemed to know she needed something steady to press against as she learned the shapes of the world. And I needed him in ways I didn't have language for. Not to protect me, not to fix me, but to remind me that healing could happen in silence, that trust could live where words failed. Our routines remained gentle. Walk through the neighborhood, park visits, grocery runs where Shadow waited beside the cart return, unmoving, his leash looped loosely around the metal rail. Never taught, never tested. He didn't need to be told to stay, he just did. Strangers would pass and pause. Is he a service dog? One asked. No, I said. He's just very old, and very kind. It wasn't entirely true. He wasn't just anything. He was a presence itself. A gravity that drew in softness wherever he went. Even Olivia's daycare teacher noticed. On her first visit to the house for an in-home evaluation, she paused in the doorway. There's something unusual about him, she whispered. He doesn't move like other dogs. It's like he's carrying something. Maybe he is, I said. But he's not carrying it alone anymore. Olivia was saying more words now. A handful, up more, light. But one word came first, and came often. It wasn't mama. It wasn't a dog. It was Shaw, soft, breathy, barely there, but unmistakable. Every time she saw him, every time she reached for him, Shaw, as if the rest of the name lived only in her breath. He responded to it too. The sound of her voice was all it took for him to rise, stretch, and come to her side. He didn't wag in the traditional sense, but his eyes grew brighter, his ears lifted, a quiet joy. One morning, I took a photo, the only one I allowed myself. I didn't frame it or post it. I just kept it on my phone, tucked away like a secret. In it, Olivia sits on the porch step, one sock rolled down, a maple leaf stuck to her knee. Shadow is lying behind her, head turned toward the camera, but eyes locked on her. You could see it even in pixels. The unspeakable thread between them. That evening, I got a call from my sister. She was in a better place now, so she said. Therapy, medication, a part-time job at the library. She asked again about Olivia. Could she visit? Could she bring a small gift? I told her, maybe, that I'd think about it. After the call, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor. Shadow padded over and lay at my feet. I didn't speak. He didn't move. just rested his head on my toes, his breath warming the top of my slipper. It was enough. That night, I dreamed of the swing set, not the real one from the beginning. This one was clean, new, painted yellow, unchained by memory. And in the dream, Olivia swung slowly, her giggles echoing through sunlit trees. And Shadow sat beside her, eyes closed, finally at ease. When I woke up, I couldn't stop thinking about the dream. Not because it was beautiful, but because it felt like permission. Like something inside me had finally exhaled. A few days later, I packed a box. Carefully, the giraffe toy, the frayed towel, a printed copy of the photo, a small note. He chose her, and she chose him, and I'm just lucky enough to witness it. I mailed it to my sister. I didn't expect a reply. I didn't need one. That weekend, I caught Shadow doing something he hadn't done before. We were out in the yard. Olivia was napping indoors, and I was pulling weeds from the base of the fence. I looked up, and there he was running. Not fast, not puppy smooth, but running. His legs loose, his tail lifted, his breath deep and easy. A slow circle through the grass, a wide arc of motion. No reason, no prompting. Just motion for the sake of motion, for joy. I dropped the trowel, just watched. Let the moment fill me. Let it say all the things I hadn't said aloud. That he was whole again, not unscarred, but whole. That maybe I was, too, or getting there. When he finally stopped, he walked straight to me, sat down, pressed his head against my knee, and I whispered into his fur the only words that mattered. Thank you. It happened on a Thursday. One of those strange in-between days where the season doesn't know what it's trying to be. The morning had come in with low fog, but by afternoon, the sun was warm enough that Olivia walked barefoot across the porch, Shadow trailing behind her like a silent cloud. I was inside folding laundry when I heard the sound of gravel crunching under unfamiliar tires. Not fast, not urgent, just slow enough to mean intention. I peered through the curtain. A car was parked just beyond the gate. I didn't recognize it. Silver, clean, newer than any car in this neighborhood, and standing beside it was my sister. She didn't knock, just stood there, one hand on the gate, the other clutching a brown paper bag like a peace offering. Her shoulders were hunched the same way they always were when she felt small, when she was unsure of her welcome. I stepped out slowly, not to meet her exactly, just to exist in the same air. Shadow was already on the porch, standing beside Olivia. His body was still, not defensive, not wary, just alert, like he remembered something, or recognized something, unspoken. My sister looked at him first. Her eyes widened, then softened. "It's him," she said. Not a question. Just breathe. The dog from the swing. I nodded, said nothing. There was a pause between us, not hostile, not even heavy, just wide. The kind of space grief carves when it stays too long between sisters. She lifted the bag. "I brought banana bread," she said. "Your favorite?" Still warm. Her voice cracked on the last word. She looked down. "I didn't think I'd be this nervous." "You didn't tell me you were coming," I said quietly. Not angry, just truthful. I was afraid if I asked, I'd give you a chance to say no. I studied her face. She looked better than I remembered. Less brittle. Her hands still trembled, but not the way they used to. Not like before. "You can come in," I said. She exhaled, a sound that was almost a sob, but stayed just breath. She opened the gate slowly, didn't step inside right away, just knelt. "Is he safe?" she asked. Shadow didn't move. He watched her, his head tilted slightly. Then, in one silent motion, he stepped down from the porch and walked to her. He didn't wag, didn't lick her, just sniffed her hand and sat down beside her knee, like he'd decided, like he remembered enough, like he forgave something without knowing what. Olivia toddled after him, her face serious. She looked at my sister for a long time, then reached out, pressing one small hand against the paper bag. A touch, that's all it took. The gate, it seemed, had already been opened. We ate together on the porch, quietly. The bread was still warm, just as she promised. Olivia sat between us, pulling off tiny pieces and offering them to Shadow, who took them delicately, as if each crumb held a secret. My sister spoke softly, told me about the library, the counselor who specializes in postpartum grief, the medication that finally let her sleep, the neighbor who checked in on her every morning. "I've been trying," she said, "every day, not perfectly, but with intention." I believed her, maybe not completely, but enough to let her stay a little longer, enough to pour her tea and ask about her books, enough to let the past rest in the shadows where it belonged. That evening, after she left, Shadow sat by the front window for hours, watching, not anxiously, just a present. When Olivia fell asleep, I sat beside him, hand resting on his shoulder. "You knew," I whispered, "didn't you?" He blinked slowly, turned his head, and laid it in my lap. That was enough to answer. The next few days felt different, not worse, just fuller. My sister began visiting in short, careful increments, always bringing something: a book for Olivia, a small plant for the kitchen, a scarf she thought I'd like. She never overstayed, never pushed. She watched Shadow more than she spoke, said once, "He looks like someone who's been through a war, and comes back kinder." I didn't argue. Olivia grew bolder in her steps. She began leading him through the yard, one hand clutched in his ruff, the other pointing toward whatever wonder had caught her eye: a butterfly, a dandelion, a passing cloud. He followed without hesitation, always watching her feet, always knowing where she was. One morning, we found a note tucked beneath our doormat, folded, unsigned. The handwriting was neat, block letters. It read, "That dog has been on this street for over a year. Now he's always with that baby. Just want to make sure everyone's safe." I read it twice. My chest tightened, not because of what it said, but because of what it assumed. Those broken things were dangerous. That loyalty had an expiration date. That love, once dented, couldn't be trusted again. I didn't tell my sister about the note. I didn't want to see that familiar shame flicker behind her eyes. Instead, I watched Shadow that afternoon with new intensity, the way he sat at the edge of the yard, not facing the street, but the porch, always between, always ready. The next day, a knock came at the door. This time, a stranger stood outside, a man in khakis and a collared shirt, clipboard in hand. He introduced himself from animal control. "We got an anonymous concern," he said. "Just routine, no accusations. Mind if I ask a few questions?" Shadow sat beside me, calm and unflinching. Olivia peeked from behind my leg, gripping a cookie in both hands. "They said the dog was a stray," the man said, "that he might be dangerous, that he's not licensed." I bent down and gently removed the tag from Shadow's collar. I held it up, let the man read it, found my address below, and then Olivia's name. I watched his eyes pause there. He looked down at her. She stepped forward and placed her hand on Shadow's back without a sound. "He seems calm," the man said, scratching the back of his neck. "Has he ever shown aggression?" "Never," I said. "Only stillness, only care." The man crouched slightly, held out his hand. Shadow sniffed it, then turned his head and sat down. "I can't see a reason to report anything," the man finally said. "Seems like this dog's exactly where he's supposed to be." He smiled once, tipped his hat, and left. That night, I found myself awake long after the house had gone quiet. I sat on the porch with a blanket across my lap, Shadow beside me. I thought about all the things we carry: fear, memory, grief, and how none of them vanish. They just learn where to rest. "I don't know who you were," I said into the dark. But I know who you are now. Behind us, through the open window, Olivia let out a soft sigh in her sleep. Shadow's ears twitched, but he didn't rise. He stayed beside me, as if to say, "You're not alone in this either." After the visit from animal control, things changed, but not in the way I feared. The street didn't whisper. The neighbors didn't retreat. If anything, people seemed softer, more watchful in the way that kindness sometimes is. There were more nods, longer glances. One morning, someone left a new water bowl on the steps with a note tucked inside. "He belongs." I kept the bowl, washed it, filled it with clean water, and set it beside the porch swing where Shadow liked to nap in the late morning sun. It felt like a small permission, like the world was quietly agreeing with what Olivia and I already knew, that he was home, that he wasn't ours so much as with us. Olivia had begun to speak in soft clusters, now not full sentences, but pairs of words stitched together like gentle declarations. "Shaw, come. Shaw, sleep. Shaw, here." And always with that same reverence in her tone, as if his name were a spell that kept everything steady. One afternoon, I found her in the hallway, kneeling beside him as he dozed. She had draped her favorite blanket, the one with tiny stars on it, over his back like a shawl. She wasn't playing pretend. She was offering comfort. I watched from the doorway and didn't say a word. There are gestures so whole, so instinctive, they make you realize how love teaches itself. The leaves had begun to fall. Each day, the yard filled with amber and russet, a soft mosaic of seasons shifting. Shadow began sleeping a little longer, stretching a little slower. He still followed Olivia's every step, but sometimes from a slight distance now, not out of disinterest, but trust. She was steadier, more sure on her feet. He didn't need to hover, just be near. One morning, I noticed a slight hesitation in his gait, a pause before he stood. He didn't cry, didn't limp, just moved more deliberately. I sat with him in the kitchen after breakfast, my hand resting between his shoulder blades. "You're getting tired, aren't you?" I said softly. He didn't move, but his eyes met mine, and I knew. That week, I made a call, not a goodbye call. Not yet, just preparation. I spoke to the vet we'd seen once for vaccinations, for records. I asked if they made house calls. "We do," she said, "whenever you need it, even if it's just to check in." Her voice was gentle, no pressure, just presence. I didn't tell Olivia, of course, but I watched her closer. I watched the way she leaned into him now when she was tired, the way her voice turned soft when she said his name, the way she paused at the back door, waiting for him before stepping outside. She knew something was shifting too. Not through words, but through rhythm, through the invisible thread that had always bound them. That Thursday, the sky was a thick, quilted gray. Rain threatened, but never fell. I bundled Olivia, and we drove. To the park, not the one with the swing set, but a different one. A quiet trail tucked behind the church, where the trees made a canopy of gold and rust. I brought Shadow with us. He hadn't ridden in the car in over a month, but he climbed in easily, as if he knew this drive mattered. We walked slowly, Olivia holding my hand, Shadow trailing close behind. The path was soft with leaves, and the wind was low, making everything feel like it was breathing. At a small clearing, I laid out a blanket, and we sat. Olivia played with pine cones. Shadow lay beside her. I watched them together with no fences, no porch, no swing set. Just open air and earth, and the sound of things being as they are. That's when Olivia did something I hadn't seen before. She stood, walked a few feet between them, and pressed her forehead to his. She stayed like that, eyes closed, hands on his shoulders for several long seconds. When she pulled back, her lips moved, not loud, not clear, but the word was unmistakable. "Thank you." I didn't cry, not then. I just breathed, because somehow, she had said it for all of us. When we returned home, Shadow was slower getting out of the car. I didn't help. Just stood close, let him find his way. He stepped down. I walked to the porch, lay on the mat without a sound. I brought him water. He drank, then rested his head on his paws and closed his eyes. That night, after Olivia was asleep, I lit a candle in the living room. No reason, just something soft to fill the quiet. Shadow lay at my feet. I reached for the small box where I kept his things, the towel from the swing set, the copy of the photo I never framed, the tag from the first caller. I held them in my hands, one by one, not to sort, just to remember. Outside, the wind picked up leaves scraped softly across the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, sharp and quick. Shadow lifted his head, ears turning. He didn't rise, just listened, then laid his head back down. The next morning, he didn't come to the door when I opened it. I found him curled beside Olivia's crib, just like always. But he didn't rise when she called. He opened his eyes, blinked slowly, and thumped his tail once. I sat beside him and whispered, "Do you want to rest today?" He blinked again. That was all. I stayed home that day, canceled everything. No park, no errands. Just the three of us, soft music in the background, soup on the stove, stories whispered to the air. Olivia curled against his side for her nap, and I joined them on the rug. For the first time in months, I fell asleep in the daylight. When I woke up, they hadn't moved. In the late afternoon, my sister called. I didn't answer. She sent a message. I had a dream about him. He was standing beside a river, just standing, like he was waiting for someone to cross. I stared at it for a long time. Then I turned off my phone. That evening, I brushed his fur slowly, feeling every ridge of his spine. He sighed into the movement. When I was done, I kissed the top of his head. "You can stay as long as you want," I whispered. "But if you need to go, you'll never leave her heart. Or mine." Shadow lifted his head, met my eyes, then laid it down again, and breathed, steady, whole, present. The candle burned low that night. I didn't blow it out. I let it flicker in the dark until it faded on its own. Some lights know when it's time to rest. The morning came soft, softer than most. The light was gray and thin, but gentle, the kind of morning that arrives not with noise, but with breath. You feel it before you see it. The wind had calmed overnight. The trees outside my window stood still. No rustling, no falling leaves, just hush. I rose slowly. My back aches from sleeping on the floor again. I had meant to get up, to move to my bed after Olivia settled, but I hadn't. I'd stayed there, beside them both. Olivia curled into the crook of Shadow's belly. The shadow stretched long and still, and me, somewhere in the middle, unwilling to disturb the gravity of their sleep. Now, in the dim morning light, I reached out to him first. My hand moved instinctively to his side, to the warm rise and fall I'd come to know like my own breath. But this time, there was no rise, no fall, just stillness, deep, complete. I didn't pull my hand away, not at first. I kept it there, pressed flat against the weight of him, waiting for a breath that didn't come. I watched his chest, listened, and then, without panic, without noise, I knew. I closed my eyes, not to cry, but to make space, for the moment, for the knowing, for the silence that now belonged to him. Olivia stirred beside me. She let out a sigh, turned in her sleep, and nestled further into his body. She hadn't noticed, not yet, and I didn't wake her. I let her rest there a little longer, let her feel the comfort that had never left her side. Not even in the end. When she did wake, her eyes blinked slowly, confused by the lack of movement beneath her. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and looked at him. "Shaw," she said softly, patting his side. "Shaw asleep." I swallowed. My throat was thick with salt. I nodded once. "Yes, I whispered. Shaw's sleeping. She leaned forward and kissed the top of his head like she'd done a dozen mornings before. Then she crawled into my lap. I wrapped my arms around her, and together we sat beside him. I didn't call anyone that day, not right away. We stayed home. I laid a clean blanket over his body, lit a candle beside him, placed the frayed towel, the one from the swing set, at his feet. Olivia kept bringing him things, her giraffe, a crayon, a leaf she found outside, as if she understood that love doesn't vanish, it just changes rooms. That afternoon, my sister arrived. I hadn't asked her to come, but she showed up anyway, quiet, respectful. She saw him and didn't ask questions. Just knelt beside him, rested a hand on his paw, and said, "Thank you." Her voice cracked on the second word. She stayed with Olivia while I stepped outside, called the vet, arranged it all. They came an hour later. 2 kind women in dark sweaters, soft-spoken, reverent. They brought a stretcher, asked permission for everything. Let me hold him one last time. Let Olivia say goodbye, not in words, but in touch. She pressed her face to his shoulder, wrapped her arms around his neck, and whispered, "Shaw good." I nodded. Yes, baby, he was good. When they carried him out, the wind stirred again, not loud, just enough to lift the leaves on the porch. One curled leaf landed on the step where he used to sit and watch the road. I left it there. That evening, I didn't light a candle. I opened the window instead. Let the night breathe through the house. Olivia fell asleep early, curled in my bed, the stuffed giraffe clutched tight. I sat beside the crib for a long time, not because I had to, but because stillness felt right, like something was being honored. In the days that followed, people left things. A note in the mailbox, a bouquet on the step, a small wooden carving of a German shepherd left anonymously on the swing at the park. I walked Olivia there 2 mornings later. She pointed to the swing and said, "Shaw seat." I didn't correct her. She wasn't wrong. I brought the carving home and placed it on the windowsill where Shadow used to lie. It wasn't him, but it was something. A weight, a memory, a way to say, "You were here, and you mattered." Olivia still looked for him in small ways. She'd turn at the sound of the door creaking, pause at the porch, sit on the mat and wait. But she didn't cry. She just waited, then stood, and moved on, as if she knew he hadn't left. Not really. He was in the blanket, in the way the wind moved, in the spaces that had once been quiet and were now something more. I started writing again, just a little, journaling, mostly. Pages filled with the kind of thoughts you don't say out loud. How strange it is that grief and peace can exist in the same breath as a dog who said nothing changed everything. How silence can protect just as powerfully as noise. My sister visited more, brought books for Olivia, cooked meals. One night, she sat beside me on the porch and said, "He gave us all something different, didn't he?" I nodded. "He gave me a reason to stay," I said, "when I didn't know I needed one." She looked at me for a long time and said, "Me too." Winter came, softly that year, not cruel, just still. Olivia walked stronger now, her gait sure, her laughter louder. She didn't speak of him every day, but when she did, it was with joy. "Shall run," she'd say, or "Shall swing." She never said she was gone. I never taught her to, because maybe he wasn't. Not really. On the first snowfall, I took her back to the park. The swing set was empty, the chains crusted with frost. We sat on a bench nearby, bundled in scarves. She pointed to the swing and said nothing, just stared, then reached for my hand. I squeezed it once. I looked down at the snow and saw, beside our prints, something else. Just for a moment, faint, almost vanished. A paw print, pressed deep, then gone. I smiled. Not because I believed in ghosts, but because some imprints are made of more than weight. They're made of memory. And memory, when held with love, doesn't fade. That night, as I tucked Olivia into bed, she whispered, "Shaw, stay." I kissed her forehead. "He's already here," I said always. And then, as the room darkened, as the house quieted, as the night wrapped around us, I whispered one final thing into the stillness. "Thank you for choosing us."